Black waitress feed homeless man." Then he slipped her a note when she read it. She couldn't stop crying. A homeless man walked into the fanciest restaurant in the city. The manager wanted him gone, but one waitress refused to let that happen. And the note he left behind? Nobody in that room was ready for it. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments what time. The dinner rush at Hargrove's was the kind of busy that felt like music. Every table full, every glass catching amber light. The low, comfortable hum of people who had money and knew how to spend it. Hargrove's Steakhouse wasn't just a restaurant, it was a statement. And for Amara, 27 years old, white shirt pressed crisp, navy blue vest squared on her shoulders, white apron tied clean at the waist. It was rent. It was her mother's medication. It was the student loan that didn't care what kind of night she was having. She had learned to carry all of that with a smile. She was good at it. She was refilling water at table 9 when the door opened and the cold air pushed in ahead of him. She felt him before she saw him. The way the room temperature changed, not from the draft, but from the subtle shift that happens when comfortable people suddenly become aware of someone who isn't. He was maybe 55, maybe older. Hard to tell because hardship adds years a calendar never put there. He had a thick gray beard and pale, weathered skin, mapped with the kind of lines that come from sleeping outside in weather that doesn't negotiate. On his head sat a heavy gray ushanka, ear flaps tied loosely, fur matted from years of being the only thing between a man and the cold. His olive green jacket was thick and worn, the fleece collar turned up from habit. He moved slowly, deliberately, and he looked around the dining room the way a man looks at a world he used to belong to. He sat down near the door, and the room noticed. Amara noticed something else. She noticed Mr. Hargrove. He was already moving. Richard Hargrove, 52, dark gray suit, striped tie, arms crossed over his chest like a locked gate, had built this restaurant from nothing and had spent 23 years making sure everyone inside it felt like they'd arrived somewhere worth arriving. He was a fair man in many ways, a hard man in others, and right now his eyes were fixed on the man near the door with the focused intensity of someone who had already made a decision and was walking toward it. Amara moved faster. She grabbed a menu, crossed the floor, and reached the table first. "Good evening," she said, warm and clean and real. "Can I start you with some water?" The man looked up. His eyes were blue and tired and filled with a kind of wariness that doesn't come from one bad day. It comes from hundreds of them, stacked on top of each other until caution becomes a survival instinct. He looked at her like he was waiting for the part where she asked him to leave. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. "Water would be real nice." She brought him water. She brought him bread from the basket meant for a table that hadn't arrived yet. She set it down in front of him without ceremony, without performance. Just placed it there like it was obvious, like this was simply what you did for a person who was hungry. Behind her, she heard Mr. Hargrove stop walking. He followed her to the kitchen 2 minutes later. "Amara," low voice, controlled. She turned around and met his eyes directly, the way she always did, the way that she knew quietly unsettled him even after 3 years. "You understand what you're doing." "I'm serving a guest," she said. "Don't make this simple when it isn't." "It is simple, Mr. Hargrove." She kept her voice even, respectful but immovable. He sat down. He has money on the table. He asked for soup. She paused. "What part of that is complicated?" Richard looked at her for a long moment. His jaw was tight. His arms were crossed. He was a man who had an answer for everything inside these four walls, and she could see it frustrating him that he couldn't locate the answer right now. "This is a fine dining establishment," he said finally. "Yes," Amara said, "and he is a person. So." She picked up the water pitcher and walked back out. Richard stood in the kitchen doorway and watched her go. The man ordered the French onion soup. Cheapest thing on the menu. He said it quietly, carefully, like a man who had done the math 3 times before speaking, who had made sure he wasn't asking for more than he could cover, who had his dignity arranged precisely around the edges of what he could afford. "Coming right up," Amara said, and she smiled at him like he'd ordered the most important thing in the room. In the kitchen, she put in the soup. Then she stood still for a moment, just breathing, just feeling something she couldn't name but recognized, the particular ache of seeing a person reduced to careful calculations when you can tell they were once someone who didn't have to calculate at all. She added a steak to the ticket, paid for it herself, didn't announce it, just did it. When the food came out, she set the steak beside the soup like the kitchen had simply been generous tonight. "Chef had a little extra," she said, and moved on before he could argue. The man looked at the plate. He didn't speak. He just looked at it for a long moment, and in that silence there was something so raw and unguarded that Amara had to look away, not because she was uncomfortable, but because some moments are too private to witness directly. He ate slowly, reverently, the way a person eats when they understand that warmth is not guaranteed. Amara worked her other tables. She laughed at something a guest said at table 9. She refilled wine at table 4. She did her job. But she kept circling back to him quietly, refilling his water without making a production of it, and each time she passed she felt Mr. Hargrove's eyes on her back like a hand pressing between her shoulder blades. She didn't turn around. She didn't notice the man reaching into his jacket until she was clearing a nearby table. He pulled a small piece of paper from his inside pocket, folded twice, worn soft at the creases, like it had been written and carried for a while, waiting for the right moment. He set it beside his empty plate. Then he stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked quietly to the door. By the time Amara reached the table, he was already gone. She picked up the note, unfolded it, and stopped breathing. "I was a surgeon for 22 years. I lost my wife to cancer in 2019. Then my practice, then my house. I have been sleeping outside for 14 months. In all that time, not one restaurant has served me without making me feel like I was less than human. You served me like I was a person, like I still mattered. I don't know your name, but I want you to know I am going to be okay. I have decided that tonight. The kindness you showed me cost you something, and you gave it anyway. I will carry this. Thank you." Amara's hand came up and covered her mouth. The tears came fast and quiet, and she had absolutely no power over them. She stood in the middle of that warm, expensive, beautiful dining room, and she cried. For the 14 months, for the wife he lost, for the surgeon's hands that used to save people and now held a soup spoon in a borrowed chair, and for the small, enormous fact that he had decided tonight in this room that he was going to be okay, that she had been part of that decision. She felt a presence beside her. Richard Hargrove held out his hand without a word. She looked at him, still crying, searching his face for something. She wasn't sure what. Maybe judgment, maybe impatience, maybe the usual. But his expression was different now, quieter, like something behind his eyes had shifted and hadn't shifted back. She placed the note in his hand. He read it. She watched his face while he did. She watched the exact moment it reached him, the slight tension in his jaw releasing, the way he exhaled slowly through his nose, the way his eyes moved over the words a second time like he needed to make sure he'd read them right. He folded the note carefully. "I was going to remove him," he said. His voice was low and stripped of its usual authority, just a man's voice. "I had already decided." Amara didn't say anything. "I had a reason in my head that felt real," he continued, "about atmosphere, about what guests expect." He paused. "But you got there first." "I just served him," she said softly. "No." Richard shook his head slowly. "No, you didn't just serve him." He looked at her, really looked at her, maybe for the first time in 3 years. "You saw him. That's different." The dining room continued around them, glasses clinking, quiet conversation, the smell of good food and warm bread, the ordinary machinery of a place where people came to feel special. Richard handed the note back to her. "His meal tonight comes out of my pocket," he said, "and if he comes back—" He stopped, cleared his throat. "When he comes back, his meals are on the house, all of them." Amara looked at him. "You think he'll come back?" "I think," Richard said quietly, "that I owe him a reason to." He straightened his tie. He looked around his restaurant, the one he'd built with his own hands, the one he'd mopped floors for at 29 with the heat turned off at home. And something moved across his face that looked a lot like recognition. "Put up a plate for him," he said. "Keep it warm, in case." Then he walked back to his post at the edge of the floor, arms at his sides this time, not crossed. Amara pressed the note once between both palms. She tucked it into the pocket of her white apron right against her hip, and she went back to her tables. She served every single one of them like they were the most important person in the room, because they were. Every single one of them was. And somewhere out in the cold city night, a man who had once held lives in his surgeon's hands was walking a little straighter than he had in 14 months. He had decided to be okay. And 2 people inside a warm restaurant, a 27-year-old waitress in a navy blue vest and a 52-year-old man who had almost forgotten what it felt like to need someone's grace, had played their small, permanent part in that decision. Some nights change nothing, and some nights change everything. This was the second kind.